no one can act with impunity.
These are crimes that are beyond the pale.
We are talking about human beings. We're not talking about numbers.
We need a court. That's as simple as that.
This is Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg.
All rise.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Janet.
So rather than a full episode this week, we're just going to introduce you to our Patreon feed.
Over on Patreon, we run the War Criminals Book Club, where we kind of talk through a book or sometimes a documentary or a movie that we like that is relevant to the field of accountability for international crimes.
God, it's not always stuff that we actually like. We've had some really crap book suggestions. Thank you, Molly Quell, for ridiculous references to the Geneva Conventions in kind of pulpy, testosterone-filled science fiction. I really love that one, as you can tell. I am not recommending.
And we had some special guests talking about the books they love, like this episode that we're going to have you listen to a snippet of from July with Lucy Gaynor. It's a kind of a longish bit where Lucy is discussing her favorite history book. It's Michel Trouillot's Silencing the Past, just to give you a flavor of the kind of stuff we get up on over on Patreon.
I want to kind of pin it back to Lucy again via a quote from the book and to ask where specifically you think this fits in with our world, which is the quote on silences, that silences enter the process of historical production at four crucial moments: the moment of fact creation, the making of sources, maybe that's quite relevant to what Steph's just said, the moment of fact assembly, the making of archives, which I know is something that you spend a lot of time thinking about, Lucy, the moment of fact retrieval, the making of narratives, and you also think a lot about that, and the moment of retrospective significance, the making of history in the final instance. I'm not too sure what that means. I suppose it's sort of writing about things sort of that happened in the past. So I'm wondering where that kind of fits within our world, where you see those four instances of silences working. But maybe Steph has a comment on that first.
I just had a brief comment on the way that he breaks that down. It seems that he's, with this final writing of history and narratives, I think that used to be that you had the one definitive book on a certain era. And what we're seeing in the last decades in history writing is that there's a lot of kind of, I don't want to say revisionist history, but yeah, there is no longer the one definitive book. And if there is a definitive book, usually somebody comes up with a book that shows that it wasn't as definitive at all. So there is also that development in history. But Lucy can probably say more about that.
I have a lot to say on this. This is also a quote that I think stands out to a lot of students that read this for the first time, is these four silences. And I think even when I was rereading this book for this podcast, I think these four stages of silences also apply to the way history or the past or a story about violence is made in international criminal trials as well, right? So the silences enter at the moment of fact creation, which he calls the making of sources, but could also be the giving of a testimony, right? A person's recollection of an event, if they are called as a witness, is inevitably going to contain certain things that are not said, either because they didn't see them, they don't remember them, they cannot speak to them, but also investigating teams inevitably investigate some things and not others. And then you also have the moment of fact assembly, making of archives. Courts are forms of archiving as well, because they are bringing together a lot of disparate sources of information about usually a very kind of widespread, complicated, or often traumatic conflict. So bringing together all of this, let's call it in this context, evidence in the terms of a prosecution theory of the case or an indictment, also creates silences, often silences that are very vocally pointed out by the defense. But there are other silences as well that are there that maybe we don't know are there because they're not talked about in the trial. And then the moment of fact retrieval, the making of narratives, that could be silences that are produced in the arguments made in the court, also in the way, in something that I've looked at quite a lot, experts can testify to kind of the contextual overview, the way they talk about that or are able or unable to talk about certain aspects of a conflict in a courtroom create silences. And then I think in the making of history is always a little bit more diffuse, but I think to me that really speaks to the silences that are present after a judgment, right? We were talking earlier about the Ekotomen and Gaisona judgment that was made yesterday. And I think with almost every judgment in international criminal justice, people are unhappy with it for different reasons. And something that I find very interesting and that I've looked a lot at in my research is even people who, for want of a better phrase, kind of get their way or win in the judgment, right? They want somebody to be convicted of a crime and that person is convicted. They might still see in the judgment things that they don't agree with. Maybe a certain aspect hasn't been talked about. Maybe sexual violence hasn't been mentioned. Maybe the judges overlooked a certain massacre, a certain something. So I think these kind of overarching societal reactions to the judgments also point out, but contain their own silences as well. And I think that really, like the trial as a process, is almost like history making as a process as well.
So that's just a clip from the Patreon episode. But what it was making me think of, and in fact, our producer, Margarita, suggested that we also reflect on this now in the context of the recent judgment at the International Criminal Court of the Sudan case of Ali Kushaib. Lucy says judgments are like making history. I mean, did you feel like that when you were watching it? I mean, was there a particular narrative going on, Steph?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the judges had this idea very much in mind because you could tell throughout this judgment that Judge Joanna Corner, who is honestly, I have to say, one of my favorite judges, the accent is just delicious usually. They read out a summary of the judgment and it was obvious that they really tried to kind of make a story out of this and a historical narrative where they joined up all the things and showed where the testimony went. So they really laid out what happened. This was about Darfur and the Janjaweed militia in the early 2000s. And she really laid out what happened on the ground, who came, when, who did what, and what role Ali Kushaib, the defendant, had in this. And for that, they also harked back to some of the testimony. But, we always talk about testimonies very fragmented in court, and you hear just bits of what the prosecution wants to hear. And in this case, she was really stringing it all together, saying, Margarita, before our producer, recalled this testimony about sexual violence. It's quite harrowing in the Darfur case, but here she really gave it a spot for. She was explaining that the militia members went and took the women into a house, and then she would say, witness P, and then a number, as they refer to those witnesses, said, and then she had just the quotes of what happened at this house, which I won't repeat if you don't have to know it, stay in blissful ignorance because it's quite horrible. But it really showed where these testimonies come in and what the judges had looked at for their ruling. But yes, it is a way to shape this narrative and to make a story of something much more than just he is convicted of XXX counts.
Yeah, I remember Lucy was writing about the trial afterwards, and she pointed out that a historian gave testimony right at the beginning and was actually sort of testifying almost on behalf of the court. He was accepted by both the prosecution and the defense as providing an analysis of what went on. And the other bit of narrative thought that I had around it was the way the discussion around the identity of the defendant. Was he really Ali Kushaib, which his defense team had denied that he was the man identified in the indictment against him. So, there were all kinds of levels on which the story, I suppose, was being told, or history was being made in that courtroom.
Yeah, and it's good to think about the kind of reflect on the deeper layers of what we do, what we write, but also, when we talk about things on the podcast, it's a certain narrative that we're bringing forward, and we're not always conscious of that we're doing that at the time that we're doing it. But it's really great that Lucy has joined us for that podcast and a couple of other times where she's picking out the book she wants us to read.
Yeah, and we've also got another friend of the pod, a special friend of yours, I think, as well, Steph, as well as of mine, Eva Vukasic. And she's also helped us out, and we're trying to get some other people to join us on the War Criminals Book Club, and just to go a little sideways, a little bit more in depth on some of these themes, because otherwise all we're doing is just kind of covering them, basically.
And also generally, like, we don't get paid for this podcast. We're very happy for everyone that supports us, and we want to do a little extra for you. So we're trying to think of things to do on Patreon that would be interesting to our general readers. But of course, you don't have to listen to all the extra episodes if you think, my God, I can't keep up with the podcast as it is. You're also, we're also very happy if you pay and don't listen. But
yes, of course. We actually try to provide more than just the extra podcast. Also, we provide some book tips. That's for the price of a cup of coffee. You get the newsletter, extra book tips, what we've been reading or what we would recommend people to read. And for a large chai latte and cake kind of price, that's about €10, €11, I think. You also get some special goodies from us every year.
But even if you don't have anything at all to spare, you can just sign up for the newsletter and get those weekly reading recommendations that Janet said. And we'd like to thank everybody who signed up in recent weeks. And we really, really appreciate the support.
We've got a long list to get through, and we'll just read through the names. And in case, if we know the people, then we might give them a special shout out. And that's the first name on the list is Cornelika Kaiser. Hi, Cornelika. Thank you so much for supporting us. That's Sem's mum. And that makes her almost my sister-in-law, because Sem is the boyfriend of my daughter. So, it's a real family affair here.
And another person who joined us on Patreon is Kip. Kip is a long-time follower, gives us a lot of tips always on the podcast. He was almost a guest, but that didn't quite work out. So maybe another time. We keep hoping.
And thank you so much to Katrine.
And thank you, Lee Farmer.
And thank you very much, Britta Redwood.
And we also thank Mariana Ferrola. And if I pronounce that wrong, Mariana, let us know.
And thank you, Ludovic B.
And, another name where I get to make small microaggressions potentially. Thank you very much, Marlena Uni Cornea.
And thank you also to Reese Jones-Hui.
And thank you, Olof Blomqvist.
And thank you, Alori Niss. And I think Alori has been an interview, at least for some pieces that I've written. And that's not her real name, her full name, but I really appreciate it. You know who you are.
And thank you very much, Natalie von Wistinghauser. She's been a guest on the pod, and she also joined us over on Patreon.
And thank you to Tina, who's the last one.
And our normal services resume next week, and we have a great discussion planned for when can you call a conflict a war, or when is a war, essentially, and another podcast on what is going on with the new special tribunal for the crime of aggression for Ukraine.
And as always, let us know if there's some specific subjects that you'd like us to cover. Join the Patreon, send us a message, any methods that you want. We're always happy to hear from you, and do download the podcast and share us with anyone else that you think might be interested.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg, in partnership with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by Autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.